Start a new unit called From Sketches to Actual Scale Models, as you see here. And we go back to our original plans as we drew up our floor plans of our house, original designs, and this is what a contractor, a builder, would use actually to make a full scaled house. As you see, we put all the dimensions on here originally to actually build this house to full scale. But because we're using a scaled model, that means we're building it into the workshop, we have to scale it down. And we will go in more detail on how to do that. Each one of us will have to take our original floor plans and then convert each of these dimensions into the scale of our model. And so we have to think of that too. First that, and then we're going to have to consider on this scale model, we're going to have to consider all the different types of parts we're going to need to make. And what we have is a parts list, because as a parts list, you're going to go into the workshop and you got to say, okay, where do I begin? Where do I start? How do I start? And so I want to show you an idea of where to begin on the parts list. Okay, I have here in this SketchUp view is a basic exploded view of all the different parts required to build our scale model. Actually, the roof is missing at this moment, which we'll put on later. But you can get an idea of all the different parts if you had to individually measure and mark them and cut them out before you actually assemble them all together. And from this, you can see the basic idea of what it's going to require for us to make this actual scale model. So as I take this exploded view and you see all the parts, what's going to be required, and you'll have this document in your design folder, is a materials parts list. And you can see right here we have part number. That means just the total number of parts. The quantity, or that's each pieces. Sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 of each piece. The part name or description, the actual material type, and the thickness of that material, and the dimensions. That's focus. If we have the thickness in this column of the material, all that's needed is basically the length and the width. So let's start with the part number. First of all, we got to look at all the different number of parts in this house. If we counted them up, we would count each one's one part. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Plus there is the roof system, so we'll probably have 5 more pieces there. And then we haven't talked about the railing that goes around and the posts there. So we're almost talking 20 parts. So back over here, so we could just start labeling them 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Okay? Now we can talk about the quantity of parts. We don't know that until we know the part name. And so I like to think of it in a sequence, because what you're going to be required once you get the material list or the parts list, that'll help us to find out each task and how you'll cut out and assemble each parts, and that'll give you the good, nice sequence to determine how you're going to write up your plan and to build it. So let's think of this right here. So you have the quantity, number of pieces, you have the part name. So let's go over to the left. This is the plinth, as you see here. And in the plinth, you're going to know that there's going to be 4 pieces. Okay, you have the front part of the plinth and the back part of the plinth. And then you got the left side and the right side. But if you notice here, we can make the front and the back the same dimensions. Okay, and then the 2 sides the same dimensions. So if I went over to my parts list, I can put 2, and then I could put front slash back plinth. So there we go. And we know the thickness is, the type of material is MDF, and it will be 9 millimeter. The dimensions, we haven't figured that out yet, and that's what you'll be working on in this lesson. You have to figure out what the exact dimensions are based on your scale. So now we've figured the front and the back. Now we have 2 pieces here, the left and the right side. So we can put this on, we'll need 2 pieces there, plinth sides. Okay, and then we know that's going to be the same thing, MDF. We can copy and paste. And then those dimensions, the sides are going to be different than your actual front and back. Remember that. The sides, because remember we're dealing with the thickness of material, so you have to calculate that into the lengths. The width is going to be the same all the way around, but the lengths will differ. The third piece is really important, is where we're going to really begin our plan is, here's our floor, overall floor. So let's put that in there. We know we only have one floor, and let's put their floor. And then we will have MDF again, and it'll be 9 millimeters. And then we'll have to do the actual dimension, which you're going to have to figure out. Once you get that floor all cut out, then what do you see here? We see that I laid out the entire floor plan on that. That's important because when we get to this laid out, we can then identify the lengths in the amount of materials, especially the walls. As you see here, this line represents right here, this line represents here, this back wall right there, and we know we're going to go from this corner to that corner. That's going to be important in the measurements, okay? And that would be the first part I would actually make after the first wall of that, after we do the floor. And then we have this wall here, but this wall here actually doesn't start at the end. If you would actually draw this in here, and we would bring this piece right there, excuse me, and then we would then take this one and draw that into there. So already you see your thickness of your wall changes. Excuse me on that. Okay, so we have an idea of all the different parts here and all the different measurements you're going to have to include. We have the front, the back wall, the sides, and that would be the sequence I would actually consider when you actually make it. I would think about cutting out the floor first, and then I would draw out all the floor plans, and then I would cut out the different plinth widths. I wouldn't start the plinth building it yet. I would start with then to go from there, from the back wall, then the side walls, and the front walls. So all the exterior walls will be completed and nailed in place before you do the interior walls, because sometimes they adjust differently and it's hard to measure everything all in advance and then try to put it together like a kit, because a lot of times they don't just measure up. So this gives you an idea of your material list. That gives you an idea of all the different parts that's required, and you can now consider what's the sequences that you can start writing this in the plan. We'll look at the roof system at a later video, and that's a different subject and it's a little more detailed, so we'll look at that later.